Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're taking a journey, really, through time and across different cultures.
We are indeed.
We're going to explore something pretty fundamental, the solar myth.
The central idea of the sun in belief systems.
Exactly. And we've got a really fascinating mix of sources for this. We'll be looking at ancient mystery religions,
Hmm?
Near Eastern texts.
Some interpretations, maybe controversial ones, of Abrahamic faiths.
Right. And even some, let's say, less conventional ideas about what ancient stories might really be about.
It's quite a range.
It is. So our mission basically is to dive into how the sun, this absolutely essential force in all our lives, how it was understood, maybe revered, and woven into, the fabric of ancient beliefs.
Okay, yeah, let's get into it. Because it is striking, isn't it, how consistently the sun pops up as this central element.
It really is.
You think about its obvious power, light, warmth, the rhythm of the days, the seasons. It's almost, well, inevitable that early societies would build it into how they saw the cosmos.
Yeah, and their place in it.
Right. This whole concept of the solar myth, it really just highlights this fundamental human fascination, this engagement with that big star up there.
Absolutely. And I suppose one of the most direct, maybe compelling examples we find is in Mithraism. Mithra himself is, well, very clearly a solar figure.
Oh, definitely. And the structure of the Mithraic mysteries, really underscores that. Take the Grade of Heliodromus.
The sun runner.
Exactly. The sun runner initiates at this level. They would ritually imitate the sun during their sacred banquets.
Imitate the sun. How?
Well, the symbolism is really rich. For instance, the red attire they wore. It immediately makes you think of the sun, fire, the blood of life,
Ah, okay.
suggesting this really deep connection between the person, the initiate, and the solar realm.
And Mithra's role wasn't just symbolic, though, was it? He was seen as actually, shaping the natural world.
Precisely. Mithra was believed to govern the changing seasons, even the movement of the heavens. So this wasn't just some abstract idea they worshipped. It was about a deity intrinsically linked to the actual order and, well, the functioning of the cosmos.
Okay, so building on that cosmic role,
Mm-hmm.
there's this really intriguing interpretation from Professor David Ulansey about the bull slaying scene, the tauroctony.
Ah, yes. Ulanzi's astronomical take, it's fascinating.
Do you unpack that a bit?
Yeah, he proposes that the bull slaying actually represents the precession of the equinoxes.
Okay, precession, remind us.
Think of a spinning top, how it slowly wobbles as it skins.
Uh-huh.
Earth does something similar with its axis, but over a really, really long time, thousands of years.
Right.
And this causes a gradual shift in where the stars appear to be at different times of the year, like the spring equinox.
Okay, I'm with you.
So Ulanzi suggests that Mithra slaying the bull is symbolic of this huge cosmic shift. He's effectively moving the entire universe by doing this.
Wow, that's a big claim. So Mithra wasn't just linked to the sun, he was almost driving these massive celestial cycles.
That's the idea Ulanzi puts forward. And it gets tied into specific constellations too, right?
Yes, especially when you get to Roman astrology.
Ah, right. The Roman layer.
There, Mithra got linked specifically to the constellation Perseus.
Mhm.
And the idea developed that Mithra, as Perseus, slays the constellation Taurus
Which symbolically shifts the spring equinox.
into the sign of Aries. Exactly. Now, it's important to say this specific astrological link seems to be more of a Roman era thing.
Right. Maybe not so central earlier on in Iran.
Probably not. But it really highlights those deep astronomical and solar connections within the Roman version of this mystery religion. That slow wobble meant the background constellation at the spring equinox gradually changed. A huge deal, cosmically speaking.
It's amazing how they wove these complex long-term observations into their myths.
It really is. And this link between Mithra and the seasons, that seems to have been a constant thread, didn't it, for followers east and west?
Absolutely. You see it in the celebration of key solar events, things like New Rose, the spring equinox, the autumn equinox, yeah.
Yeah.
Shabielda at the winter solstice, and the summer solstice, too. It shows this deep integration of the sun's yearly cycle into their religious life.
Okay, let's pivot a bit. Let's turn to the ancient Near East now and the Epic of Gilgamesh.
Right.
Here, the solar connections might be, well, maybe a bit less direct, more symbolic, perhaps.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah, more symbolic, but potentially just as significant for understanding this whole solar myth idea.
So Gilgamesh isn't explicitly called the sun god all the way through.
No, not like Mithra.
Yeah.
But there's a pretty compelling case, that he embodies a lot of solar attributes. Have a look at the big themes of the story.
And how they might parallel the cycles of nature, the seasons.
Driven by the sun, exactly. For instance, think about the stories of Ishtar's lovers. They all end badly.
Right, she betrays them or they meet some unfortunate end. What's the solar symbolism there?
Well, one interpretation is that this pattern mirrors the change from, the life and vibrancy of summer to the dormancy of winter.
Ah,
It's described as the faithlessness of the goddess of love, but maybe on a deeper level. It symbolizes the sun's life-giving power diminishing as the year goes on.
and Gilgamesh himself rejects Ishtar. In the sixth tablet specifically, does that fit?
Potentially, yes, the sixth tablet corresponds to the sixth month in some old calendars.
Which is often when summer starts to, well, decline.
Right, so Gilgamesh rejecting Ishtar right then could be seen as the solar figure kind of turning away as the days shorten, the sun's power starts to wane.
And then there's the illness and death of Enkidu, his companion.
Does that reinforce this idea too, the death of summer?
It could well do. Enkidu is so closely tied to the natural world, wild vitality.
Right.
So him getting sick and dying, yeah, it could absolutely be metaphorically. The fading vitality of the summer season kind of dying, it's a powerful link to that cycle of life and the sun's role in it.
Our source also mentions the divine bull and the Tammuz Adonis myth. How do they fit in?
Well, they likely represent related ideas, expressing similar themes in different ways. This motif of a god or a hero linked to fertility, death, rebirth, often tied to the seasons, you see it all over the ancient Near East in various forms.
Like Adonis being killed by the boar.
Exactly. That's another story that could symbolize the end of the growing season, the death brought by winter or the dry season. The specific details change, but that fundamental connection to nature's rhythms, which are obviously dominated by the sun, seems to persist.
And we also have some pretty direct textual evidence, don't we? Letters where kings are addressed in solar terms.
We do. Those are quite telling. When you see someone address a king as my son, my lord, like in that letter from Abdas Ratu,
Yeah.
it just clearly shows the immense power and prestige they associated with the sun's image, and they applied it directly to their rulers.
So a parallel between the sun's power and the king's authority.
Seems like it. Life-giving, authoritative. Makes sense.
And then there's that even stronger one, where King Zimridi is called my lord, my god, my son.
Yeah, that really ramps it up.
It absolutely underscores that divine connection being made. The sun's brilliance, its perceived control over life, it was just a natural, potent metaphor for supreme power, even divinity in those societies.
Okay, let's shift gears again. A potentially, well, different angle here. Our sources also touch on possible solar myth traces in Judaism and Christianity.
And it's important, like you said earlier, to note these sources are themselves engaging with ideas about how religious texts develop and get interpreted over time.
Definitely. We need to be careful here. Focus on what the sources argue, not necessarily endorse the claims ourselves.
Agreed. So one source, La Controversia de Sion, it discusses the God of the Jews in relation to promises, conflict, highlighting how these narratives can evolve, be used in different ways.
Right. And then there's a point made, I think, in Mentiras Fundamentales about biblical writers maybe giving King David divine-like qualities.
Yes, drawing parallels with how Egyptian and Mesopotamian rulers were described.
Yeah.
The argument in that source is that the writers might have borrowed existing ways of talking about monarchs from the wider Near East, presenting David with titles, attributes that maybe went beyond just servant of Yahweh.
Echoing traditions of divine appointment or even divine characteristics.
Potentially, yes. That's the argument presented.
In that same source, it discusses the fable, as it calls it, of the virgin birth of Mary and Jesus's divine origin in Matthew's gospel.
Right. Linking it to Old Testament verses that the source claims were, well, misinterpreted.
That's so.
The argument there is that certain verses, particularly in Isaiah, often read as prophecies of a virgin birth, might have originally just referred to a young woman and her child in Isaiah's own time. The source suggests Matthew later reread and recontextualized these verses to support the narrative of Jesus' unique divine origin.
So it's an argument about interpretation and adaptation of existing texts.
That's the perspective offered in that source.
Yes, and the idea that the Catholic Church might have adopted some pagan myths and rituals is also mentioned briefly.
It is. That's a recurring theme in some historical analyses. The suggestion being that as Christianity spread, it might have incorporated or adapted elements from existing traditions,
Including solar ones.
including potentially solar-related ones, yeah, to make the new faith maybe more familiar, more appealing.
Now, slightly different perspective again. Maimonides, in the Guide for the Perplexed, discusses God being high and exalted in Jewish thought. Could there be, solar undertones there, elevation like the sun?
Well, Maimonides is actually quite clear on this. He clarifies that those terms, High and exalted, when used for God, they refer to his supreme rank, his power, his quality.
Ah, not physical height.
Exactly, not literal physical elevation in space. So while the image might superficially make you think of the sun high in the sky, the philosophical meaning in Jewish thought, as Maimonides explains it, is about God's incomparable status. It's not intended as a direct solar connection.
Got it. Okay, crucial clarification. Let's explore some maybe more unconventional ideas now. Our final sources raise this possibility that ancient myths might actually encode complex technical data.
Right, like the precession of the equinoxes, which we talked about with Mithra.
Exactly. Could solar myths be part of that? This idea from Hamlet's Mill, referenced in Fingerprints of the Gods?
It's a fascinating, though definitely controversial idea, that myths, which look like just stories on the surface,
Mm-hmm.
could actually be a way to preserve and pass down sophisticated knowledge, astronomical, scientific, across generations.
Hmm.
And given how fundamental the sun is to astronomy, timekeeping, calendars, it's, well, conceivable, I suppose, that some solar myths might contain hidden references to long cycle phenomena or other key observations about the sun.
And what about the Mayan calendar? That comes up too. It shows this incredibly detailed understanding of huge spans of time.
Yeah, Graham Hancock raises that question. Could that knowledge be linked to inherited wisdom,
Hmm.
connected to the sun and its cycles over vast periods?
It's mind-boggling, their accuracy.
It really is. It tracked immense periods,
Mm.
way beyond what many other cultures were doing at the time. It does make you wonder, was this knowledge inherited? Was it developed to track really long-term cosmic cycles, maybe linked to the sun's movements and its effects over huge timescales? It's a big question.
It is. And finally, there's La Esencia de Judaísmo, which talks about a kind of cosmic unity and interconnectedness between the spiritual and physical.
hmm
Now, that's not explicitly solar, but does it provide a sort of broader context where the sun would naturally fit in?
I think it does, yes.
Raw.
This idea of a deep link between the spiritual and material worlds, it gives us a framework for understanding how ancient cultures might have viewed celestial bodies, including the sun.
Right.
So while that specific source isn't focused on solar myths, it suggests a worldview where the entire cosmos and all its parts held deep significance, maybe was seen as imbued with spiritual meaning.
And the sun being so dominant and life-giving.
It would undoubtedly have held a prominent place within that kind of unified cosmic view. You couldn't really ignore it.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive, it feels like the solar myth shows up in our sources in quite a few different ways.
It really does.
We see it as a central god, like Mithra.
Yep.
We see potential symbolic figures, maybe Gilgamesh.
More symbolic there.
We've looked at potential influences on later religious ideas, though those are often debated.
Highly debated, yes.
And we've even touched on this intriguing, maybe fringe idea of myths encoding complex knowledge, astronomical knowledge, reflecting the sense of cosmic unity.
Exactly. This whole exploration just shows how multifaceted the sun's significance was. Across cultures, through history, it's been worshipped directly, used as a powerful symbol, maybe influenced religious thought, perhaps even helped preserve ancient science.
Yeah. Even when the direct links, the interpretations are argued over, the underlying importance of the sun in shaping how ancient people saw the world seems undeniable.
Absolutely undeniable.
Which kind of brings us to a final thought for you, the listener. When you consider the sun's power, its absolutely fundamental role in sustaining life on Earth, is it really that surprising that so many ancient cultures put it right at the center of their myths, their belief systems?
It makes a lot of sense when you put it like that.
What does that tell us about our enduring relationship with the cosmos? Our ongoing attempts to understand the forces that shape our existence? It's certainly something powerful to think about.
It is indeed, and we definitely encourage you to maybe look into these sources further or just consider other examples of solar myths and images you might come across. It's a truly, well, illuminating topic.